Guys, tell me, do you know what sponsorship is? What it is for? How many people do you know who would like to become a sponsor for someone? And how many people do you know who would like to become kept woman? How do you feel about this? I will now tell you my story of how I found a sponsor, and at the same time, I did not give anything in return. I'm Isabel, and my mom and I live in a rented apartment in Pennsylvania. I don't have a father. As my mother says, he was in her life exactly until he heard the news of her pregnancy. Despite the fact that he swore many times in love, loyalty, and a bright future, as soon as he found out that he would become a father, he immediately disappeared. Well, my mother did not refuse the child, and I've never regretted it since. She says, I can see how fucking hard it is for her sometimes. For as long as I can remember, at first, my mother and I wandered wherever we had to. We moved from state to state in search of the best conditions for living, and at the same time, so that it was inexpensive. In addition, my mother still could not get a normal, permanent job, and she was looking for it everywhere. She worked as a waitress, a dishwasher, a cleaner, a nanny, a governess, and we always had bad luck. Sometimes we'd be kicked out of the apartment because they urgently decided to sell it, close the restaurant where my mother just got a job, or in the house where she got a job as a nanny. Something always happened. Lost dishes, money, and they blamed my mother. Although she didn't steal. Never. That is why she did not disdain any work, because she believed that the earnings should always be honest. She taught me this too, but I grew up listening to my mother moaning from headaches, often woke up at night because she was not at home, because she was littered with dirty dishes in cafes. My mother was forced to skip parent-teacher meetings at schools, which I changed like gloves, and because of this, I was not particularly liked by teachers. In the end, when I grew up, I accidentally came across interesting ads on the internet. It said something about sponsors and kept women. I didn't even immediately understand what it meant and started Googling. This group interested me. Well, think for yourself. Who won't like easy money? According to the rules of the group, I understood that you need to get acquainted with anyone, and this someone will provide you in return for communication. While I was Googling the info, my friend Justine came up behind me. She scared me and quickly rolled up the window on the laptop. However, it managed to ignite. What? Are you looking for a daddy? Are you ready? She asked, but I didn't immediately understand what she was talking about. Justine explained to my unenlightened head that the word communication between a sponsor and a kept woman sometimes meant not only dialogue, but also intimacy. Those words gave me the creeps. How? I asked her, and she just laughed in response. My friend said that I seem to live in harsh times and not in the best conditions. But I drive everything in pink glasses. I didn't register there, but just closed the page. But Justine didn't calm down. Then I saw a different side of my friend, a side I didn't know from her yet. She said that this is not the first year that she has been earning money in the same way. Justine immediately warned that this is not considered sex for money, just pleasant communication is encouraged financially. In the end, you can make not only money, but clothes, travel, food in the end, she said. It made me laugh. And then I thought more and more about my mother. I hadn't been hired anywhere yet, but I was already so eager to help my mother. I still rejected this idea. We said goodbye, and I went home. That night, I waited for my mother for dinner for a long time. In the end, my mother came home in tears and late at night. I immediately asked what was wrong, and she said that someone spilled detergent on the floor at her new job, and when she was carrying a mountain of clean plates, she slipped and fell, breaking the new plates. Now it requires 300 pounds to restore. My mother was crying because now she didn't know how to earn money or how long it would take her to do it. I immediately calmed her down, told her that everything would be fine, and sent her to bed. I couldn't sleep for a long time. And then I went to my laptop and signed up for that group. I put up a couple of photos of myself, filled out a fake form, and waited. I immediately began to write a lot of men, adult guys. They were rude, straightforward, arrogant perverts, but I decided that I would not rush to choose a sponsor. Yes, I was somewhat ashamed and even disgusted with myself, but I couldn't just sit back and watch my mother work her ass off at a thankless job. In the late afternoon of the next day, a man wrote to me. He was twice my age, but he was respectful. He said hello, so the conversation started. His name was Tim, just Tim. We chatted for a long time. I kept waiting for the moment when he would ask to meet with him or ask for a phone number, but it didn't happen. We just talked. I told a lot about myself, threw off more photos, as he asked. For some reason, he was so interested in my life problems. So we talked for about 4 days, and then he suddenly asked to meet with me. I was scared, but I agreed. He invited me to dinner at a restaurant. I had to mentally adjust for a long time, but I arrived at my destination, where he was already waiting. Tim was a very gallant, tactful man. He kept asking me if I was okay, ordered dinner, juice, and asked a lot of questions. Again, our meeting was more like an interview. I thought that maybe the man really just doesn't know enough communication. When he found out the whole truth about me, why I registered there and how long ago, he said I was brave, and then kissed my hand. It was nice, but I didn't know how to react or whether to consider this meeting a date or just a meeting. He closed the account and drove me home. I was expecting a kiss, but he said he would call me again, and then he gave me an envelope and said, "Thank you for a wonderful evening. I haven't talked to anyone like this for a long time." When I got home, I opened the envelope and saw about $1,000. I've never held so much money in my hands before. I was so happy that I immediately gave my mother $300. I lied to her that I found a job remotely at home, like doing research papers, homework for money. Mom was surprised, but took the money. From that day on, my sponsor regularly called me, wrote to me, took me to dinner, but never touched me and constantly gave me money. My mother and I were able to close all the accounts, rent a more comfortable apartment, we paid all the debts, and began to eat better. We bought clothes, shoes, went to cafes, arranged a real weekend, and I was happy. Justine said I was really lucky, and I thought so too. Then one day, when I was home alone, Tim called me. He asked me to make a video call with him via the computer. While we were sitting and talking again, I suddenly heard behind me, "Isabel, who is this?" I jumped out of my chair in surprise. I immediately turned off the computer and turned to her. The weird thing is, we were just talking about money, whether I have enough for everything. Tim offered to give me more. My mother, of course, had a lot of questions, and she also threw a tantrum that she didn't ask me to help her, that now she feels like a bad mother and is guilty of selling her daughter. It was a long monologue from an angry woman, and she didn't even let me get a word in. Then I interrupted her, shouting that he hadn't laid a finger on me. Only then, Mama finally stopped talking and sat down on the sofa to listen to the whole story. I told her everything as it was, and there was nothing to hide. At first, she didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes, but then she calmed down a little. And then she asked me never to communicate with that man again, not to sit on such forums, and even more so, not to take money, even for simple communication. To my protests, she only responded with a hand, like, "Sit and be silent." I didn't know why not. He didn't touch me anyway. Then someone rang our doorbell. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. Mom tensed and went to open the door, and I followed. When my mom opened the door, I was stunned to see Tim standing in the doorway. Both me and my mother said, "Tim?" And then I looked questioningly at her and at him, and she looked at me and at him the same way. "Where did you get it from? What's going on here?" my mother shouted. Only Tim stood there, unsurprised. It turned out that Tim was my father. When my mom left him, he was looking for her. According to him, at first he really ran away from her, and then he decided to come back. He realized that he just got cold feet, but changed his mind and wanted a child. But when he arrived, my mother was gone. He couldn't find her for years because she changed her name. And it turns out my mom's name wasn't Monica, but Jennifer. This was a revelation for me as well. Well, then he just happened to visit a friend who was having fun on this site. He suggested that my father find a girl there and clicked on my profile. My father said he recognized me almost immediately because I looked so much like my mother. Now I understood why he was so helpful and didn't ask for anything in return. I didn't dare to tell you about it, but every time I could hardly restrain myself. I was afraid, he said. Anyway, he and Mom had a long conversation that night, but that's another story. All I can say is that everything is fine now. Now, my mother goes on dates with him.